The gun was inches from Micah Rowan's face when he understood the truth. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't fate. This was the price of opening his door. Across the warehouse, an old woman sat tied to a chair, trembling, her eyes locked on him. One wrong move and she would die. He could see it in the man's finger tightening on the trigger. "You should have stayed poor," the man sneered. "You should have stayed invisible." Micah's chest burned. His hands shook. All he could think about was a stormy night. A knock at his door. And a sick child he couldn't turn away. He had let a stranger and her son stay one night. Now he was about to learn who she really was. And why kindness is never free in a mafia world. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And subscribe. Micah Rowan stood in the middle of his apartment, while the landlord looked around with open disgust. 6 months, the man said, tapping the eviction notice against his palm. 6 months behind, and you're still sitting here like this place belongs to you. Micah opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to explain. "You're a grown man," the landlord went on. "No job, no savings, no plan, just wasting space," he snorted. "Men like you always think something will save them. It never does." Micah's face burned. His hands clenched at his sides. He stared at the floor, nodding once, the way people do when they've already lost. "I don't run a charity," the landlord said, turning for the door. "Pay up or get out." The door slammed. The sound echoed through the apartment long after the footsteps faded. Micah stood there shaking, chest tight, throat burning. One tear slipped down his face, then another. He wiped them away angrily, ashamed even of that. He sank to the floor beside the wall. The chair had broken a few days ago. The heater hadn't worked in months. The fridge held almost nothing. $27 sat folded in his pocket like a cruel joke. Outside, thunder rolled through the street, low and heavy. Rain began to pound the windows, angry and relentless. Micah pressed his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. That was when the knock came. And somehow, he knew before he stood up. This knock would cost him everything. Not loud. Not polite. Just firm enough to make his eyes snap open. Micah froze, listening as the knock came again, closer this time, heavier. And suddenly, the apartment didn't just feel poor. It felt exposed. Micah approached the door slowly, every step cautious. The hallway outside was always noisy, but tonight it felt unnaturally quiet, swallowed by the storm. He rested his hand against the peeling wood, listening, nothing but rain. Another knock sounded, closer, sharper. "Who is it?" Micah asked, adding how thin his voice sounded. No answer came at first. Then a woman spoke, calm but urgent. "Please, my son is very sick." Micah hesitated. He leaned closer to the peephole. The hallway light flickered, revealing a woman standing straight despite the rain soaking her black coat. Her dark hair clung to her face, her expression controlled, almost severe. In her arms was a small boy, limp against her chest, his skin flushed an unhealthy red. The boy stirred weakly, letting out a sound that wasn't quite a cry. Micah's chest tightened. He glanced down the hallway, then back through the peephole. The woman didn't beg. She didn't shout. She simply waited, eyes steady, as if she already knew he was there. "I don't have much," Micah said through the door. "I can't." "My car broke down," she interrupted quietly. "He has a fever. I just need one night." One night. Micah noticed then what didn't belong. Her shoes were spotless despite the flooded floor. Her posture wasn't desperate. It was disciplined. And when she adjusted her grip on the boy, Micah caught a dark smear on her sleeve, barely visible beneath the rain. Blood. The boy coughed, head rolling against her shoulder. Micah stepped back from the door, heart hammering. Blood meant danger. Midnight meant worse. He pressed his forehead to the cool wood and weighed the room behind him, the broken chair, the empty fridge, the leak dripping into a bowl. He had nothing to give, not even safety. Another soft sound came through the door. The boy's breathing had turned shallow, a thin rasp that scraped Micah's nerves. He imagined fever climbing, a small body burning out while he stood arguing with himself. He'd seen that look before in clinic waiting rooms, the look of a body losing ground. He cracked the door an inch, keeping the chain fastened. Cold rain rushed in. The woman didn't push. She met his eyes and said only, "Please." Micah swallowed. If this was a trap, he would pay for it. If it wasn't, the boy might pay instead. The math was ugly either way. "Do you have medicine?" he asked. "I tried," she said. "Nothing worked." He glanced down the hall. No neighbors, no help, just the storm and the choice. The boy shuddered, a tremor rippling through him. Micah's hand tightened on the chain. He thought of the eviction notice, of nights spent counting coins, of promises he'd made to himself about staying invisible. Invisibility wouldn't save a child. Micah reached up, slid the chain free, and pulled the door wide. Warm light spilled into the rain as he stepped aside. "Come in," he said. The woman crossed the threshold with him. The door shut behind them with a hollow click that echoed too loudly in the room. Rainwater dripped from the woman's coat onto the cracked floor, forming a thin, dark puddle. Micah pointed toward the narrow couch, its cushions sunken and torn. "There," he said. "Lay him there." She moved quickly, gently lowering the boy. Up close, the child looked worse. His lips were dry and pale, his skin burning under Micah's touch. The heat startled him. This wasn't just a cold. This was dangerous. "What's his name?" Micah asked. "Leo," the woman replied. Micah nodded and hurried to the bathroom, grabbing the only towel he owned and running it under cold water. He wrung it out and pressed it to Leo's forehead. The boy whimpered, eyelids fluttering. Micah checked the small cabinet above the sink, one bottle of fever reducer nearly empty. He hesitated for half a second, then poured the last dose into a spoon. If he used it now, there would be nothing left for later. He didn't allow himself to think beyond that. "Slowly," he murmured, coaxing Leo to swallow. The boy obeyed weakly. Minutes stretched into an hour. Micah wiped Leo's neck and arms, counted breaths, watched the rise and fall of his chest. The woman stood nearby, silent, her eyes never leaving Micah's hands. The fever didn't break. Leo's body tensed, a sharp tremor running through him. His breathing hitched, uneven and fast. Micah felt panic claw up his throat. "If it spikes any higher," he said quietly, "he could seize." The woman didn't react. She only said, "Do what you must." And Micah realized she trusted him completely. Micah worked through the night, guided by instinct and half-remembered training. He cooled clothes, whispered encouragement, and watched the clock with growing dread. Each minute felt stolen. Each breath from Leo sounded like it might be the last. Viola Kavox never raised her voice. She never paced or pleaded. She stood near the wall, hands clasped, posture straight, eyes sharp. "Has this happened before?" Micah asked. "Yes," she said, "nothing more." He pressed the cloth to Leo's neck again. The fever refused to yield. Sweat soaked the boy's hair. Micah's stomach twisted with hunger, but he ignored it, focusing on the small rise and fall beneath his palm. "You should sit," he said to her. "You've been standing for hours." "I'm fine." The way she said it ended the conversation. Micah glanced at her sleeve again. The stain was still there, dark and dried now. Blood from where? From whom? He wanted to ask, but something in her gaze warned him not to. She stepped closer, finally, not to Leo, to Micah. "You're careful," she said. "You don't waste movements." "I don't have much to waste," he replied. Leo stirred, eyes cracking open. He reached out blindly and caught Micah's fingers. "Stay," he whispered, barely sound. Micah's chest tightened. He squeezed the small hand gently. "I'm here," he said. Behind him, Viola watched the moment closely, as if measuring him. And Micah understood then that this night was no longer just about saving a child. Something far more dangerous had begun. Leo's grip tightened, weak but deliberate, as if he feared Micah might disappear if he let go. Micah stayed where he was, lowering himself to the floor beside the couch. His knees ached, his back protested, but he didn't move. "That's it," he murmured. "Easy now." The boy's breathing slowed, the sharp rasp softening into something more regular. Micah felt a slight change beneath his palm, still hot but not climbing. It was the smallest victory, fragile as glass. Leo's eyes fluttered open again. They were unfocused, glassy with fever, but they found Micah's face. "You're warm," he said, voice thin. Like home." Micah swallowed hard. He nodded, afraid to speak. The boy's fingers relaxed, still hooked around Micah's hand, and his eyelids slid shut. This time, sleep took him gently. Micah checked the clock, nearly 3 in the morning. He leaned back against the couch, exhaustion finally catching up with him. His stomach twisted painfully. He realized he hadn't eaten since the morning before, but the thought barely registered. Behind him, Viola spoke. "He doesn't let strangers touch him." Micah turned. He was scared. "So am I," she said quietly. It was the first crack in her armor, and it unsettled him more than her silence had. He saw it then, not panic, but something colder and deeper. Control born of necessity, strength shaped by loss. The fever eased another fraction, enough to matter. Micah exhaled slowly, careful not to wake the boy. Outside, the storm began to weaken. Inside, something irreversible had already taken root. Gray light crept through the cracked window sometime before dawn, thin and uncertain. Micah woke with a stiff neck and numb legs, still seated on the floor beside the couch. For a moment, he panicked, reaching for Leo's forehead. Cooler. Not normal yet, but no longer burning. Relief washed through him, so fast it made him dizzy. Leo slept on, breathing steady, his small hand still tangled in the sleeve of Micah's shirt. Micah gently eased free and stood, joints aching. The apartment looked worse in daylight. The water stain on the ceiling had spread overnight. The bowl beneath the leak overflowed, dripping onto the floor. Viola stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear. She spoke quietly, in short phrases Micah couldn't hear clearly. When she ended the call, she turned to him. "He'll be all right," Micah said. "For now, he needs rest, fluids." She nodded once. No smile, no relief, just acknowledgement. Viola lifted Leo carefully, adjusting his weight with practiced ease. The boy stirred but didn't wake. She pulled her coat tighter around him, shielding him from the cold air seeping in through the doorframe. "Thank you," she said. The words were flat, controlled, almost formal. Then she reached into her pocket. Micah's stomach tightened, but she didn't pull out money. She only paused, studying his face, as if committing it to memory. "We won't forget this," she added. Before Micah could respond, she opened the door and stepped into the damp morning. The hallway swallowed her whole. The door shut. Micah stood alone in the quiet, empty apartment, staring at the space they'd occupied. He told himself it was over. But deep down, he knew better. By noon, the storm felt like a rumor, something the city had already forgotten. Micah hadn't. He scrubbed the floor where rainwater had pooled, wiped down the couch, and tried to return the apartment to its usual state of quiet neglect. It didn't work. The place felt watched. The landlord's voice echoed from memory, 3 days. Micah checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages. Silence pressed in, thick and uneasy. He stepped outside to dump the overflowed bowl. The alley was busy again with its usual rhythm, garbage trucks, distant sirens, a neighbor arguing on the stairs. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. Yet a black sedan idled across the street longer than it needed to. When Micah glanced over, the engine revved and the car rolled away. He told himself it was nothing. At the corner store, the clerk studied him longer than usual before ringing up a bottle of water. "You new around here?" the man asked. "No," Micah said. "Why?" The clerk shrugged. "Just asking." On the walk home, Micah noticed it again, the sense of being measured. A man on a phone who stopped talking when Micah passed. Another car slowed at the intersection, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. Back in the apartment, Micah locked the door and leaned against it, heart thudding. Kindness was supposed to be quiet, invisible. You helped, then moved on. But this kindness had weight. That night, as he lay on the thin mattress listening to pipes groan in the walls, Micah understood something with sudden clarity. Someone had noticed what he did, and they hadn't forgotten. The knock came again just after sunset. Not sharp this time. Measured, controlled. Micah stood in the middle of the room, every muscle tight. He didn't move until the knock sounded a second time. When he opened the door, 2 men filled the hallway. Both wore dark suits that didn't belong in this building. Their eyes swept past Micah, cataloging the apartment in a single glance. "Micah Rowan," one of them said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Our employer would like to speak with you." Before Micah could answer, the men stepped aside. A black sedan waited at the curb, engine humming softly. The woman from the storm sat in the back seat, posture straight, expression unreadable. "Get in," she said. The city blurred past as the car moved. They didn't speak until they stopped outside a quiet restaurant already closed for the night. Inside, the lights were dim, the air heavy with silence. She faced him across the table. "My name is Viola Kavox." The name landed hard. Micah had heard it before. Everyone had. Whispers, headlines, stories that ended badly. A woman who controlled entire districts. A woman didn't cross twice, if they crossed her at all. His mouth went dry. "You're—" "Yes." She folded her hands. "You helped my son when you had nothing. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't ask what it might cost." Micah felt the room tilt. Every choice from that night replayed in his mind. "You should have closed the door," Viola said calmly. Then her gaze sharpened. "Now we must decide what happens because you didn't." Micah sat very still, afraid that if he moved, the moment would shatter into something worse. The restaurant was empty except for them, the chairs turned upside down on tables, the doors locked. He understood then that this meeting was not a courtesy. It was controlled. "I didn't help him with this," Micah said quietly. "I know," Viola replied. "That's why you're here." She slid an envelope across the table. Thick, heavy, Micah didn't touch it. "You have debts," she continued. "Rent, utilities, a future that ends in eviction." Her eyes never left his face. "I can erase all of that." Micah's pulse pounded in his ears. "And the cost?" Viola's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Nothing you haven't already paid." She explained without raising her voice. "No threats, no promises of safety, just facts. Protection, opportunity, stability, not charity, repayment." "You opened your door," she said. "That creates a balance. I will correct it." Micah stared at the envelope. He thought of the apartment, the broken chair. There are 3 days left. He also thought of Leo's hand gripping his sleeve in the dark. "If I say no," he asked. Viola didn't hesitate. "Then you walk out of here, and we never speak again." The way she said it told him that was a lie. You didn't meet people like her, and simply returned to anonymity. Micah reached for the envelope, then stopped. His hand trembled. "I won't do anything illegal," he said. Viola nodded once. "Good." Her eyes hardened. "Because I wouldn't ask, not yet." And Micah realized the debt was only beginning. Micah expected a mansion. What he didn't expect was the silence. The estate sat behind iron gates and tall hedges, removed from the city as if it existed in a different country altogether. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as the car rolled to a stop. Security cameras tracked every movement. Men stood at measured distances, alert but motionless, like pieces on a board. "This isn't my world," Micah said under his breath. Viola heard him. "It is for now." Inside, the house was immaculate but cold. Clean lines, neutral colors, nothing personal, no photographs, no warmth. Power lived here, not comfort. Leo's room was the exception. The boy sat up in bed the moment Micah stepped inside. "You came," he said, eyes bright. Micah smiled despite himself. "I told you I would." Leo reached for him without hesitation, wrapping thin arms around Micah's waist. The trust hit harder than any threat ever could. Viola watched from the doorway, unreadable. "This is temporary," she said, "until I know you're safe." Safe from what? Micah asked. She didn't answer. Days passed. Micah was given a room, clean clothes, food that felt unreal after weeks of scarcity. He wasn't asked to do anything. Not yet. But he noticed the patterns. The coded conversations. The tension that never left the air. One night he overheard raised voices through a closed door. Names spoken sharply. Warnings. Leo slept peacefully beside him, unaware. Micah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. He had stepped into a world that didn't forgive mistakes. And something told him he was already being tested. The first sign was how often Virla's men began asking where Micah was. Not directly, never bluntly, just small, careful questions disguised as concern. Had he eaten? Was he with Leo? Did he plan to leave the grounds today? Each question felt harmless on its own. Together they formed a net. Micah felt it tightening. Virla summoned him one evening to her office. The room was windowless, lit by a single lamp that cast long shadows across polished wood. She didn't ask him to sit. "You've noticed the change," she said. "Yes." "Good," she folded her arms. "It means you're paying attention." Micah's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to be a shield." "No," Virla agreed. "You're here because people underestimate you." She explained without ornament. Rivals were watching. They always watched. Anyone close to her became leveraged eventually. The difference was whether that leverage broke or held. "You matter to Leo," she said. "That makes you visible." The words settled like a weight on Micah's chest. That night, the car following them didn't bother to hide. It slowed when Micah glanced back, its headlights steady and deliberate. Leo squeezed Micah's hand in the back seat. "Is something wrong?" the boy asked. Micah forced a smile. "No, just tired." The car turned away at the gate, but the message lingered. Later, a phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Not Micah's. A single text flashed before the screen went dark. "We know who he is." Micah stared at the empty screen, pulse racing. Kindness had made him visible. And visibility, in this world, was dangerous. Virla didn't sleep that night. Neither did Micah. He found her in the kitchen just before dawn, standing perfectly still with a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hand. The estate was quiet in the way powerful places always were. No noise, no comfort, only control. "They'll come for him," Micah said. "Yes," Virla replied. No denial, no hesitation. "For Leo." "For you," she corrected calmly. "Through him." The truth landed like a blow. Micah felt his chest tighten. "You said I'd be safe." "You are," she said, "as long as you listen." She explained the rules the way one explained weather. Rivals tested weakness. They provoked reactions. They waited for mistakes. Leo was protected. He always would be, but Micah was something new, unplanned, emotional, human. That made him useful. Later that afternoon, Virla insisted Micah take Leo outside the gates for the first time. Ice cream, daylight, normalcy, 2 cars followed. Armed, obvious. Micah felt the trap, even as he nodded. At the shop, Leo laughed for the first time since the fever, chocolate smearing his cheek. Micah wiped it away with his thumb, smiling despite himself. That was when the van pulled up. Doors slid open, too fast, too coordinated. A hand grabbed Micah's arm. Another reached for Leo. "Don't move," a voice hissed. Leo screamed. Micah reacted without thinking. He pulled the boy tight, turning his body into a shield. "No," he shouted. "You don't touch him." A gun pressed into Micah's ribs. At that moment, Micah understood the price of being kind. And it was far higher than he had imagined. The gun dug harder into Micah's side, as chaos erupted around them. Leo screamed again, burying his face in Micah's chest. Micah wrapped both arms around the boy, turning fully, placing himself between Leo and the weapon without thinking. Fear roared through him, sharp and blinding, but his body didn't hesitate. "I said don't move," the man snarled. Micah didn't answer. He only tightened his grip. Then everything happened at once. A car slammed into the van from the side with a deafening crash. Glass exploded across the pavement. Shouts filled the air, commands barked with authority, boots pounding against concrete. Gunshots cracked, echoing off the buildings like thunder. The man holding Micah was yanked backward. The pressure vanished. Micah dropped to his knees, still shielding Leo, heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. "Down," someone shouted. Micah obeyed, curling over Leo as another shot rang out. He felt the vibration through the ground, through his bones. Leo clung to him, shaking. Then a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Enough." The word carried weight, finality. Micah looked up. Viola stood several steps away, coat immaculate, eyes cold and absolute. Her men surrounded them, weapons raised, bodies positioned with brutal precision. One of the attackers lay bleeding on the ground, groaning softly. The others were on their knees, hands forced behind their heads. Viola's gaze flicked to Micah, then to Leo. For the briefest second, something human surfaced in her eyes. "Take him home," she said quietly. As Micah rose, legs unsteady, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't a rescue. It was a warning. And it meant the war had truly begun. The estate gates closed behind them with a heavy metallic groan, sealing the night outside. Micah carried Leo inside, the boy clinging to his neck, trembling but silent now. His small breaths puffed warm against Micah's skin, grounding him as the shock slowly faded. A medic was already waiting. Leo was taken gently, efficiently, the way children were handled here, never rushed, never ignored. Micah watched until the door closed, then felt the weight of everything crash down on him at once. Viola stood at the far end of the hall, her expression unreadable. "They won't try again," she said. Micah laughed once, sharp and hollow. "Because they're afraid." "No," she replied, "because they're dead." The words landed with a dull finality. Micah felt his stomach turn. He knew this world wasn't clean, but hearing it said so plainly stripped away any illusion he'd been clinging to. "I didn't agree to this," he said quietly. Viola approached, stopping a careful distance away. "You agreed the moment you stayed." Micah shook his head. "I stayed for him, not for you, not for your war." She studied him, eyes calculating. "And that's why you're still alive." Silence stretched between them. Outside, engines roared briefly, then faded. Somewhere far away, consequences were being erased. "I can't live like this," Micah said finally, "waiting for the next attack, wondering who pays for my safety." Viola didn't interrupt. "I need to know," he continued, voice tight. "If I leave, will Leo be safe?" For the first time, Viola's composure faltered. "Yes," she said, "but he won't understand why you're gone." Micah closed his eyes. Protection had saved them. Now it was demanding a price he wasn't sure he could pay. Micah stood in the doorway of the guest room, long after the lights had gone out. The estate was quiet again, the kind of quiet that came after violence had been carefully cleaned away. Somewhere down the hall, Leo slept, surrounded by guards and cameras and walls thick enough to stop bullets. Safe, by this world's definition. Micah's bag sat open on the bed. He'd packed quickly, too quickly, as if speed might make leaving easier. He walked to Leo's room and stopped just inside the door. The boy lay curled on his side, one hand clutching the blanket, brow smooth, breathing slow and even. Micah knelt beside him, careful not to wake him. "I didn't plan this," Micah whispered. "I never plan anything like this." Leo stirred, eyes opening just a crack. "You're still here," he mumbled. "For now," Micah said, forcing a smile. The boy reached out, fingers wrapping around Micah's sleeve the same way they had that first night. "Don't go," he said softly, not pleading, just stating it as if it were obvious. Micah felt something inside him give way. He straightened slowly and turned. Viola stood in the doorway, watching. She said nothing. She didn't need to. "I won't be a weapon," Micah said. "I won't be bait." Viola nodded. "Then don't be." "I'll stay for him," Micah continued. "On my terms." Silence. Then Viola stepped aside, opening the path back into the house. Micah unpacked the bag and set it back in the closet. The door that night could have closed forever. Instead, he chose to stay, knowing full well that once you belong to a world like this, leaving is never simple. And that whatever came next would change him forever. 6 months later, the city no longer recognized Micah Rowan. Not because he'd become powerful, but because he had become steady. The fear that once followed him everywhere had softened into vigilance. He lived carefully now, deliberately, choosing each action with the same quiet intention that had once made him open a door on a stormy night. Leo was stronger, laughing more, sleeping without nightmares. He called Micah family without hesitation, as if the word had always belonged there. Viola Kavak's changed, too, subtly, almost invisibly. Fewer violent decisions, more distance from the shadows that once defined her. Not redeemed, not forgiven, but altered. Love had not softened her power. It had been redirected. Micah never pretended the world was safe. It wasn't, but he had learned something deeper than safety. Kindness was not weakness. It was a force. And once released into the world, it reshaped everything it touched, especially the one who dared to give it. If this story touched your heart, subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Now tell us in the comments, what would you do in his situation? Would you open the door or walk away? Tell me in the comments. Your answer might say more than you think.